Many people have asked me, why run for the US Senate? They say, Mark, you've had a great life, you built a great business, you've had a great family. Now's the time to relax and enjoy. Well, like many of you, I've just been frustrated, and I will say at times angry, that politicians in Washington treat us like we're idiots at times and that we're children at times. This coming week, I'm going to sell the remaining portion of my business that I'm divesting myself of. And once I do that, I will have my nest egg, let's say, in the bank, which will make me comfortable for retirement. Once that happens, I'm going to have a tremendous amount of time on my hands. I've been angry, I've been frustrated. I feel like I've been taken advantage of. And I have the opportunity to go fix that. Now, here's what I think is the compelling value proposition for someone to think about voting for me. One, I've made my bones. I have my money in the bank. My family is set. I am set. My extended family is set. So I have no need for money or power, quite frankly. I'm 61. I'm running in 2022. That means that if I get elected, I'll be 69 at the end of one term. I have no desire to run a second term. What I do have a desire to do, though, is put someone in a Senate seat from Ohio that will support President Trump's policies. Now, I want to be really, really specific about this. It's President Trump's policies that I want to support. There is what I think is just a deceitful tactic on the left and with the mainstream media to say, if you support Trump's policies, you support the man, you support him as a human being, you support his ethics, you support his morals. Honestly, when I elected Donald Trump, when I voted for Donald Trump, I was voting for a chief executive officer of the United States of America. I wasn't voting for a pastor. I wasn't voting for a spiritual advisor. I wasn't voting based on morality. I was voting based on who can do what I feel in my heart, in my soul, in my head needs to be done to move the country forward, to get us back on track, to keep us from going over this crazy socialist, democratic socialist, progressive leftist cliff, because that's what it is. Listen, my heritage is Eastern European. Let's say Russian, although it might have been Belarusian, White Russian at the time. My ancestors were poor. They were peasants. They came before the revolution to the United States. They weren't well schooled. They may have, in fact, even been illiterate, at least the first generation. I don't know. You know, my relatives were kind of like, we're from Russia, and we're never going back. That place is awful. We're here in the United States, and this place is great. And trust me, they weren't wealthy. Both of my parents, when they were young children, still had outhouses in their backyard. So they were not wealthy. They weren't middle class. It just drives me crazy that especially our younger generation, what has been termed the millennials, when I hear the percentage of that group that believes in socialism, all I would say is that our schools, public or private, have failed them. They know nothing about the fact that, what's the number? 100 million people were killed under socialism, murdered under socialism during the last century. Seriously? You think that's cool? It's not cool. It's crazy. I believe Trump needs to have people in place so when he leaves in 2024, there is some overlap and carry on of his policies, not the way he does business personally, but his policies. And when I say business, I'm talking about running the country. But there has to be some what I call exhaust left in Washington to help the next president, who hopefully is like Trump in terms of policy beliefs, help that president accomplish a tremendous amount. We've got the ability to accomplish a tremendous amount in the United States very, very quickly if we can get the four legs of the stool to work together well. I say four, people will look at this video and say, hey, but Mark, you don't understand. There's three branches of government. Yeah, I get that. But we've got a bicameral legislature. And so the House, the Senate, the executive branch, and the judicial branch all have to be aligned and running together for us to be as efficient as possible as a country and to get as much accomplished. And so what I want to do for Ohio is I want to be that person that finally supports Donald Trump. Let's face it, Rob Portman is a rhino and Sherrod Brown is a socialist. So we've got nobody supporting Trump from Ohio. I want to be that person. I want to go for 6 years, and that's it. I will not run a second term. Now, here's the benefit of that. First, I'm going to have this campaign from now until I get elected in 2022, hopefully. I'm not going to be one of those arrogant politicians that says, when I'm elected. But if I'm fortunate enough to be elected by the great people of the great state of Ohio and go to Washington, I will never have to raise funds again after I'm elected. I will be able to commit 100% of my time to the business of Ohio in terms of being supported in the federal government and the federal government and working to make America great again and keep America great again. So theoretically, the people of Ohio, if they understand my value proposition and they believe it and they say, today, I'll vote for Mark in 2022. So they've got 8 years to look for someone to replace me that might be a 2 or 3 term senator. Now, I'm hoping it's only 2 because one of my goals when I get to the Senate, assuming I do, will be to push for what I would call 12 and 12 term limits. 6 terms as a representative in the House, 2 terms as a senator in the Senate, and you're termed out. I also believe that we need more anti-corruption legislation. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here right now. I'll probably do a separate video on that because I think it warrants more time. So that, quickly in a nutshell, is what I think some of my strategy qualifications are. Now let's talk about my experience qualifications. I grew up in a lower middle class to middle class family. And I did like many Americans do. My family moved from lower middle class to perhaps upper middle class. And now I'm probably upper middle class to higher class at a very low end, believe me. I went to college. I went to Ohio State University, the Ohio State University. I graduated with an engineering degree. I went to work for companies after that, like IBM and Electronic Data Systems, EDS, Ross Perot's whole company. And then I worked for some smaller companies, and in 1996, I started my own company. I grew it to just under $100 million in revenue and just under 800 employees. I'm an entrepreneur. I understand what it takes to grow a business. I understand the risk that you have to undertake to do that. Up until just recently, well, actually right now, every one of my assets was signed over to the bank in the event that we defaulted on any of the borrowing with our banks. My cars, my house, everything, retirement funds, everything was on the line. I understand that risk-reward equation, And quite frankly, when Barack Obama said, you know, you didn't build that, I was pretty pissed off about that. Because let me tell you, the only thing that the federal government does, from my perspective, is gets in the way of business growth, entrepreneurialism, building wealth and capital in the United States, putting people to work. Now, that's probably not 100% true. It's probably 80 to 90% true. We do need some regulation. We need to, you know, keep the car between the lines. But the amount of regulation that we have, the amount of reporting, the amount of taxes, the amount of audits that we go through, the expense of having to do audits for things like 401k plans. These are things that most voters don't know of, don't care about, wouldn't understand if you really explained it to them in detail. They just don't care. But what they don't know is these regulations have a really dampening effect on business investment, and investment in business typically coincides with or requires employees and jobs being created and payroll taxes being generated and things of that nature. The other thing that angers me is we never hear about, you know, business process re-engineering the federal government. The federal government just keeps getting bigger or stays the same size, and all we hear about is taxes. We got to find a way to collect more taxes, either grow the economy so people pay more taxes or increase taxes. What you never hear is, why don't we find ways to make the government more efficient? Why don't we find ways to have the federal government do less and state governments do more? Like, does it make any sense to you that you pay for Medicaid in your paycheck, that money goes to Washington, and then it comes back to the state? What kind of value do they add? It's those kind of things that I think we need to take a big look at. Medicaid, Medicare, health insurance, highways, the Department of Transportation, taxes taken from you and I when we buy gas, sent to the federal government, and then redeployed back to the states. What about we keep that money in the states and we figure out what to do with it and how to do with it? Now, I'm okay with the federal government setting some standards and some requirements, but I don't see any reason why the money has to be taken from us, sent to Washington, and then sent back to the state or locale that we live in. It just seems kind of ridiculous to me. It seems like the only reason someone would do that or have done that was to have some power of the purse and be able to control things. And the things they control are essentially you and I. So I think we ought to do away with as much of that as possible. I think we could reduce the size of the government by anywhere from 10 to 20% and probably not miss a beat. Thanks for listening to me. If you've got any comments, I'd love to hear them. If you've got any ideas for me, I'd love to hear those. And I'm okay with criticism. I think you learn from criticism as long as it's constructive and it's not divisive and just nasty. So thanks a lot, and I do appreciate you paying attention to me. I will see you next video.